Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is your boy Skip, aka Skip and Tosh, back here to have another discussion on some fantastic comics. I got my twin here with me, Zach. Say what's up to the people, Zach.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? Like Skip said, I am Zach. I am his quote unquote twin from a different time zone. But yeah, and fellow comic book fan. And yeah, we are going to be talking about some good Ed Brubaker
Oh,
comics tonight. Looking forward to it.
absolutely, yeah. Some Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips. You'd be hard pressed to find a better creative team in comics that are this prolific and consistently at the highest level of the craft, state of the art. Like they hit it. They hit the mark. Of course, they're known for their noir stories, first and foremost, and they get around into subgenres within noir. But if you're a comic book lover, it's very, very hard to read their books and just not flat out see the quality, even if maybe you don't take to the stories. But I'm willing to bet you will take to the stories. Now, I myself, I'm a really, really big fan of theirs. At this point, I've read just about everything that they've done. Sans. I'm finishing up Incognito, and then I need to knock out Sleeper, which I might not do until December of this year, when they Wildstorm reprints that deluxe hardcover. But Zach, you're getting a little bit more of an introduction to them. Kind of let people know where you're at with your experience of Brubaker and Phillips' work.
Yeah, this is the book we're going to be talking about tonight, which is The Fade Out. This is my first independent book that I've read by Brubaker and Phillips. I have read some of Brubaker's stuff before, mainly his Marvel stuff. Of course, there's his Captain America run, which I think a lot of people will say is the like a definitive run on Captain America. I'm not. I don't believe Phillips. I don't know if I've seen too much of him. He and Brubaker. I don't think were together at Marvel. At least thinking of the books that I've read. But yeah, I've read some of his Captain America stuff. He had a really good little run on X Men, which is funny because thinking about it, his X Men run and then like Fade Out, almost nothing in common. Like his X-Men run, it's very sci-fi, it's very like futuristic and almost Star Warsy or Star Trek, it's like apples and oranges with Fade Out. But it was really good. It was a really good X-Men story that he crafted, and read a little bit of his Iron Fist run as well. But all of those, this was back at a time where I was strictly just about the big two. If it wasn't superheroes, I wasn't reading it. And now I've reached this point where I'm kind of trying to expand my horizons, my graphic novel and comic horizons. And I've been hearing Skip and Tosh and a few other friends like Ash on Comics or Eric Breen, the great wise Breen. I've been hearing y'all talk about Brubaker and Phillips for, I mean, it feels like years almost. It probably has been a year or two. Just talking about different series like Criminal, mainly Criminal, some Reckless, and then Pulp was another one I know that you were talking about just last night. They had that re-release, the super deluxe book that came out. So yeah, I was looking for some comic reading, something brand new that I could sink my teeth into on vacation last week, and at my LCS just happened to find this big old collection of the Fade Out, the complete story. Found it, and I was like, you know what? I've been hearing people talk about this. Let me go ahead and give this a shot. Read this while I'm out on the beach getting sand in my toes. And man, I tell you, this was a delight to read. I almost never, when I get a graphic novel or I get a collection, I almost never pace myself. Like I want to read through. I want to binge it like I binge a Netflix show almost, which
Right.
is but this, I was like, let me take my time with it. Let me read piece by piece each day and kind of just sink into it because Brubaker, the way I've heard people describe it, it's just so rich and there's just so much greatness in his writing style. And then Sean Phillips' artwork. I just wanted to really take my time and enjoy it, and I was not disappointed. I came out of this really loving the story. The characters were great. Just a really good time. I'm really glad I picked it up. And yeah, I'm dipping my toes further. I'm going further and further into the pool. I just picked up Pulp today at the shop when I was down there for New Comic Book Day. So I
Yeah.
got Pulp, and yeah, we're gonna see where it goes from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, a great introduction to their indie work together because if I heard it correctly, you said this is your first Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips indie work, right? This is your introduction.
Right. This is my intro. Yep. This is the first one with the two of them together. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So no, this is a really good one. And especially like, like I said, knowing you, the way that I usually recommend books, it's very common for people to love a book so much and just recommend it to people because of how much they love it. And I used to
Hmm.
do a lot of that too, and it's not that I don't do any of that at all, but I want comics to hook people. I don't like I love having more people to talk about my favorite books with, but it's more about just like hooking people on comics, even if it's a book that I'm like, oh, you know what, I didn't really like it, but based off of how I hear you talk about, the books that you enjoy, I think you would really like this, or I think you would really like, this particular book. So this one, I was like, I think this is a really good one for you to, to start on, and I'm so glad that you had the reaction to it that you did. Now, with all that said, okay, so we kind of know where I stand with Brubaker and Phillips. I am just like a head over heels fan. You
Hmm.
feel pretty good about what you read. You like you said you were pacing yourself, to
Yeah.
to get through it. You didn't want to scarf your food. You wanted to chew it properly, right? Like savor the
Savor
flavor.
the flavor of it all. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know it's my first story. I think before I can say definitively, I want to get a few more stories under my belt. But yeah, the two of them just seem like a really good team, a writer artist team. And there's so few teams that I can think of. They're out there, but it's not like they're growing on trees. Competent teams of writers and artists. There's a few out there, a few modern ones, but they're very few and far between. So if I can find a team, and obviously these guys, they like to work together and they've made multiple stories together. So I do like that. I do appreciate that as well. So
Absolutely. Well, let's jump in and talk about it. So, we've got the fade out. It was coming out monthly, but of course, it was collected. It ended up being a total of 12 issues, so 4 issues to a trade. They broke them down. The premise of the fade out is you have this writer. His name is Charlie. He he's a writer in Hollywood, kind of 40s era Hollywood. He wakes up in one of the bungalows one night after one of those, old Hollywood parties, and the rising starlet of the studio is dead. He finds her strangled to death, and his head
dun
is
dun dun.
aching. Dun dun dun. So there we go. There, if it's Brubaker and Phillips, there's going to be some element of crime somewhere in there, not just noir, but usually some sort of crime. So we got
Yep.
our crime, and he's three sheets to the wind, coming out of it severely hungover, head aching. He's not sure who did it. He's not even certain that he didn't do it. He's hopeful he didn't.
Yeah.
But as he tries to sneak out of the bungalow, find some place where he wipes down the scene just in case he did do some things, to try to cover his tracks in case he has, cause to.
Hmm.
Even just being implicated on the scene is enough to, not want someone to, leave any evidence behind. He gets to a place where he can get his bearings, and then he starts to track back things, and he goes from being a Hollywood writer who would write a detective story for other actors and actresses to playing out to now being a detective and trying to absolve himself halfway, but also just try to find out what the heck happened, just in case he actually did do it. Let's just kind of jump
Yeah.
into that aspect. Zach, like from where things start out with Charlie, and then the unfolding of some of the different characters in the story. Like how did you feel about the introduction to the book?
So I love the introduction. First of all, I mentioned this before we started, but I love this opening thing where it's like cast of characters and it's the different headshots. It's so great because, like, going into the book, I didn't realize there were going to be so many characters and all the different like pieces of the puzzles that they would play. So
Hmm.
I really appreciated that, and I also like, yeah, the story just kind of hits the ground running because there's not really any lead up. The first panel is Charlie waking up in the bed. It's almost like it's like the Hungover, but not as funny, or the Hangover, I guess, not the
Right.
Hungover. Yeah, he literally wakes up in the right there, the very first panel. He wakes up. There's a little bit of talk about, we kind of get a sense of the era because they talk a little about the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor, and
Hmm.
then yeah, it's like boom, he walks into the room, he finds the movie starlet dead on the ground, and it's just boom, you're right away, you're thrust into the middle of this murder mystery, and he seems like he's this really like he's almost got like this Peter Parker quality to him. And what
Right.
I mean by that is he's like this guy, his heart's kind of, he wants to do a good job. He wants to do good, but he's just kind of got like this bad luck. He's kind of given the short end of the stick a lot, it feels like. And I like that about him. He's an underdog type of character is what I got from when I got from our introduction to him. But yeah, he's hungover. He's obviously blacked out during the night. Can't remember anything. That comes up throughout the story as he tries to fill in the gaps and the pieces. And then yeah, like you said, he's not sure what happened. He doesn't know if he did it, if somebody else did it. He just knows that he should probably not be in the house when someone else shows up. So he grabs a rag, or what he thinks is a rag, comes up later on, and he just starts wiping down the evidence, and he flees the scene. And then from that, the next character that we really get an introduction to is Dorothy, who I really like. She fills in the cool kind of My Girl Friday role.
Hmm.
She's I thought she was going to be a love interest kind of at first, because when I think of 40s films, 50s films, the I think of some where the girl in that kind of assistant role, they end up fall. But I actually like that she and Charlie don't ultimately get together. I think that
Right.
Dottie is probably actually one of my favorite characters in the book. She's just like this sharp-witted
Hmm.
character. She does like the PR work for this Hollywood studio that Charlie works for, and
Yeah.
she was a really cool character, I
Yeah, you
thought.
can tell Dottie has been around the block, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't feel like a spring chicken. She's
Hmm.
not a deer in the headlights. She like,
Yeah.
especially with her gig, she's bumping elbows and stuff with everybody, and even the undesirables. So Dottie's got a pretty good handle on things. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and so as we're meeting the crew, and kind of finding out who does what. So Dottie does the PR for the studio. So naturally,
Hmm.
she gets some of the the information the fastest. She knows everybody XYZ. As it's kind of come out that Valeria Summers, the upcoming starlet for the studio, has passed away, we get an introduction to another character, Brodsky, who's like the fixer for the studio. How did you feel about
Yep.
Brodsky?
Brodsky, that guy, yeah, that handsome fella down there in the bottom left corner. Boy, that guy, yeah, I mean, he's like, he's the macho, the gruff guy. He's like, it's my way or the highway guy, and almost seems like a caricature, but he's actually, I mean, he has his job, he does what he's supposed to do, and I thought he was more. Yeah, I thought, honestly, I thought there's a good chance that this guy is probably the bad guy, or at least he's privy to, or he works with the bad guy. But yeah, he does what he does so the company can keep its lights on. So he just wants to protect the studio's reputation, which it's an admirable goal, but he does it, and there's just so many like dirty, sneaky underhand the methods that he chooses. I guess he uses a lot of like gray tactics to achieve a good goal. I guess is I'm probably flubbing that up,
No,
uh,
you got it.
but yeah, no, Brodsky is, and then he's kind of got he's got some very rough edges, but then as we see later on in the story, he does actually come through. He does help Charlie out when he is in a spot where he needs help. But yeah, he's pretty interesting character. I ended up, I was fascinated anytime he showed up. He's because again, he's got that gruff. You don't know if he's gonna pick a fight with someone, if he's gonna break someone's arm or whatever.
Right.
He does what he needs to do to get the job done. But yeah.
Brodsky's one of those guys. He's here to get the job done. A few introductions to a few other characters. So we got Dottie, who's PR. We got Brodsky, who's like the fixer, studio security, quote unquote. I mean,
Yep.
or in another sense of the meeting, because he's not just protecting. He's not just protecting bodies. He's protecting the studio's interests. So
Yes.
that's a full service job. Let's say that. Um,
Mhm.
Flapjack is a one-time child actor, and he plays a bit of an interesting role, kind of on the deeper end of things. And I think we'll talk about a little bit of that a little bit later. But
Yeah.
Tyler Graves, who is like the up and coming, almost kind of like James Dean style, starlet. He's the male starlet that's coming up. But we
Yep.
have another character that's really important because Charlie is a screenwriter, but we see another one down there named Gil Mason, ex screenwriter.
Gil. Yep. Ex
Oh my
screenwriter.
gosh. Tell me a
He
little bit
was
about Gil.
Gil was I actually was really interested in Gil's character. So Gil, the important thing about Gil's character is you got to keep in mind the timing and the era that this takes place in. There's a lot of, at this time, the FBI is they're like scouring over Hollywood. They're on the hunt. This is like almost Red Scare type stuff. They're on the hunt. They're out looking for communists. And
Mhm.
it's McCarthyism basically is going on, or at least a prelude to it. And so Gil is this guy that the FBI, they've outed him. They've confirmed like, hey, this guy is a communist. He's in As a result, he ends up getting blacklisted by Hollywood. Gil is this. He's actually, if I can make this analogy right, he's like
Yeah.
an older version of Charlie. Charlie, as he's coming into the screenwriting, he's fairly new. He's got dreams and aspirations, things that he wants to do. Gil, we find out, has lived that life. Like, he's been a screenwriter for a while. He knows what it's like. He knows the highs and he knows all the lows. Like, he knows that there are people that will take credit for your work. He knows that it's difficult to get work, and
Yep.
he just, most of the time, he's kind of lost his ambition. He's just kind of like, he goes out to the bar and drinks his sorrows away every night after working, because he knows it's not enough. So he's lost his ambition. He's lost like any sense of glamour in the job. So he's got a more pessimistic side of things than Charlie. And then after he gets blacklisted, he and Charlie come up with this system where Charlie will get hired on to write screenplays for these studios, and Gil will actually be the one who writes them, and
Hmm.
Charlie just takes credit for it. And I guess they split the paycheck. So Gil is still able to make some kind of a living, albeit he's splitting half of it. It's not a full check, but he is still getting to do some work. He's still getting to write, but it's all under Charlie's name. And so yeah, really interesting. First of all, the relationship between the two I thought was really interesting,
Yeah,
and
very
just the
layered, right?
very layered, and also just how they're opposite each other almost. Like I was
Yeah.
saying, Charlie's new. He's kind of bright-eyed. He loves what he does, and Gil's on the other side of that. He's like, well, wait till you do it for 10 years or something, and you know.
Yeah,
So
then you'll
yeah,
feel like
Gil.
me.
Then you're gonna become me. This is your future if you stay in this job too long. But yeah, and Gil, he does become an important character and an important part of the story. And like I said, because a lot of it, you do have the government interfering, FBI and stuff, and there's this whole kind of subplot where the communists, they're looking out for the commies and trying to find who to root out, who to expose, and the stuff with Gil plays a lot into that.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think really the last person to kind of discuss as far as like the on the character spectrum in the first portion of it would be, oh, let's go back to it. Victor Thursby, as well as Franz Schmidt. So you've got
Franz Schmidt, yeah,
Franz
that
Schmidt,
guy.
the director, the German director,
Hmm.
who is not who has to be in America now for some reasons. And then you got Victor Thursby, who is the co-founder of Victory Street Pictures, and that is the main
Yep.
studio that Charlie or that Gil, by way of Charlie, is writing to and through, and that's where you get, all the different actors and actresses and stuff as part of the studio. And being that Valeria Summers that's who Charlie woke up to and passed away. And of course, there was, that hit the papers. It was a very big deal. Dottie's got to deal with that mess as well as trying to cope and mourn for this
Mhm.
young girl who she's been trying to help bring her up through the studio system, raise her profile, get media and paparazzi paying attention to her when she goes to red carpets and all of that stuff. She's trying to mourn and do her job at the same time. And because it's a studio, because momentum is a thing, you've already got the replacement blonde. As Valeria Summers was a blonde, you got the replacement blonde, and that's Maya
Right.
Silver. And then she ends up coming into things as well.
Yep.
I'll kind of ask you about Victor Thursby. I'll leave Thursby a little bit later. Let's talk about Maya Silver a little bit. The way that she comes in and her dynamics with Charlie and their whole relationship. How did you
Mhm.
feel about how that was portrayed?
I liked it. So when Maya first comes onto the scene, at first I was like, oh well, she's gonna be like this innocent girl, this new girl that doesn't know all the tricks and turns of Hollywood and everything. You find out later on that's not the case. That she's actually like her talent
Married and
agent.
stuff.
She's married, and she's got a talent agent that's been telling her what to do. She does know the score. She does know, like, sadly you do see a lot of the underbelly and the underhanded tactics, like how you get casted and everything. So she does know about all that. But in Charlie, I think she sees like a good guy, like a genuinely good guy in Charlie. Somebody solid that's not gonna use somebody like Hollywood. Like Hollywood will just like, oh, okay, you're this actor or you can do this. They'll use someone as like a tool. And I think she
Hmm.
sees in Charlie that he's a bit more human, like,
Hmm.
hey, this is somebody I could actually talk to. If I have something that's on my shoulders, or something weighing me down, I can actually unload with. I think that that's what she sees in Charlie, and that's why their relationship goes to the extent that it does. um, but yeah, Maya was in there are some people that like her. Victor Franz, the director, and I
Hmm.
think Thursby as well, even aren't too keen on her.
Hmm.
I think Victor's thing was that he really liked Valeria Summers and he didn't want to
Yeah.
continue shooting after she wasn't available. So she knows that she's got shoes that she has to fill. That she's going to be up and coming, and so she even works as we go through the story. You see like her working with Dottie and the studio to kind of build up her reputation, to kind of get her on the path to stardom. So
Absolutely, and part of like the path to stardom, especially
mhm.
in this era, is keeping a clean nose, so to speak, or at least a clean profile.
Yeah.
So with the reality the reality of what she had to do to start to climb, the social ladder, climb the studio system, climb the convoluted path, to stardom in Hollywood. She had a real life too.
Hmm.
And she, like I said, she had a husband, this guy Armando Lopez. He was a big band trumpet player, and of course, part of the trope for that time is, musicians, were usually addicted to music and usually something else. So for him, he's an alcoholic. So as she's got one foot in the Hollywood system and then one foot in the real world, we see
Yeah.
some of that profile had to be cleaned. And Brodsky, the fixer, here he comes.
Yep.
And her husband, he's out of hand. He starts beating her. Brodsky's got to come. He's got to light this dude up. She's
Hmm.
split because she's like, yeah, I don't want to be abused. And Brodsky's got to protect, he's got to protect that mug. That's going to be in
Protect the
front of,
face. Yeah.
got to protect the face. Going to be in front of photography cameras, video cameras, film cameras, all that stuff. But she's split because as her husband's getting, Brodsky's touching him up and playing, Dr. Miami on his face. She's like, hey, no, like he's still got to make a living. Like I still love him, even though I'm walking out of that life, like don't mess up
Right.
his lips, like he's got to play, So it's just, I even loved those nuances, and those things made the story feel that much more authentic when it's not just such a straightforward, like, oh, I'm getting beat up. Oh, here comes my rescue. Like I'm just walking away. No, she's torn. She
Yeah.
loves him. She spent time with him. He has helped support her, and he lets her know that, hey, I've helped support you. It was me and my big band trumpet playing that supported us to allow you to go on these auditions and meet all these different people and stuff like that. And I still love you, but even if you leave me, like, you're just gonna forget the work that I did for you. Like, that scene, I think, was really important for me when I was reading the book to buy into Maya, because we're coming out of the starlet just being dead right out the gate, and then
Right.
to have to go over to the replacement person. What's gonna tie us to this person and make us kind of root for this person and make us feel like this person is potentially relatable? And I feel like that was just a really, really awesome um, thing that was added. And then lastly, to kind of take us over into the next chapter of the next section of the book, get us into the act two, so to speak. We had Stevie Turner, who was a photographer to the stars, and it was very interesting because he ended up snapping some pictures of some stuff. And as Charlie is going around, still trying to find out what's going on, still investigating some things, he ends up finding himself kind of like at this party, and he's noticing that there's this figure that he's looking over his shoulder, and he keeps seeing this figure is like taking pictures, taking photographs, and all of this other stuff. And he feels like he's being trailed, and potentially someone might have made him out. What did you think about, like, as we start off with the caper, and then it kind of starts to play second fiddle as Charlie has to like actually work and then navigate, the social circle? How did you feel about when it started to come back around that he's being tailed?
Yeah, at this point, so the way that it appeared to me is like part of it is him like I mean, it's like he's back at the bungalow. He wants to make sure that his trail is covered, that he can remain kind of like separated from everything that happened. But also like the way it came across to me was like, because like it's almost like he's getting paranoid.
He's paranoid.
He's getting super. He's like looking his over his shoulder, like all the like, oh, is this person involved? Does this person know? He's like second guessing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Charlie, man. Uh, but yeah, and he's trying. Every time he sees this face, he's always thinking like, where do I know this guy from? And
Mm-hmm.
you see he's trying to put it together in his brain, and he can't do it. But yeah, that's what it came across like. Yeah, he wants to be able to like keep himself clear of the scene of the crime, but also it's just like a lot of paranoia. Like you don't know if this guy is actually if he can actually incriminate him or not. But Charlie's just like, there's a chance that he can, so I should be on the lookout for this guy. So
Absolutely. The paranoia is struck in, and I think that's a really awesome part of the book too, because we're with Charlie a little bit, where that's our guy that we're following along. And the way that is presented in the book, and this is what I mean by like Brubaker and Phillips being masterful storytellers. When you get to that part, you're really not sure if Charlie's tripping or if he really is being tailed the way that they set it up. You're not sure.
yeah.
You're like, are you Charlie? Like, they pace it out so well and go over to like parts of the story that don't feel like filler, feels like very important parts. It's either character building or plot building. And then when you come back around to it, I remember like going back through the pages like and trying to be like, hold on, wait, did I see that guy somewhere else before myself? And it wasn't so obvious that he was in one of the panels or stuff like that. They did a really good job of like stoking that, that paranoia and making you feel, just as unsure, just as anxious as Charlie did. And it was really, 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 really good. Okay,
Oh yeah.
so now we jump back. Anything else about the first act before we move on to the second one?
No, I mean not really. Not that I can think of. I mean we do see. I mean first of all, the art is just fantastic. I mean just going through here and seeing Sean Phillips' artwork and Betty Brightweiser's colors they're
Oh
just it
yes.
works. They just flow together so well with the story. It's really really great. Yeah, like we said with Maya, I mean, I'm flipping through trying to get caught up. We do see also we just see like how sneaky and how creepy Thursby is. Like there's the scene like you find he's got like hidden hallways in the studios that take him into the dressing rooms, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like I said, it's like the underbelly of Hollywood. It's like you end up actively rooting against like the studio heads and even some of the other characters because of how creepy it is. But yeah, Maya's got like, and you find out like Maya either because she thought of it herself or because she had her agent like tell her, hey, this is what you do to kind of protect yourself, I guess, for lack of a better term. And
Yeah.
you find out like she comes across as this innocent new coming girl, but she's got a head on her. She has a brain. She knows like, okay, this is what has to happen. This is how I can defend myself. She actually knows. It's like she's playing chess almost. She knows what she's doing to an extent. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
other than that, the paranoia bit I think also really fits in just with the overall story, especially with everything going. Because you think, I mean, you're in Hollywood at this time. If you're a writer, you're you're probably paranoid already because FBI is going from studio to studio, looking to see, okay, well, are you a communist? Are your co-writers, your friends? I mean, there's a lot of paranoia that goes on in this era of history. So having that be like an overall theme in the story, I think was really, really cool.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, playing into that, and that's what I liked about the first few panels and the first page, them like setting the tone of what the temperature of the world is right now,
Hmm.
and all of those things really did, really do play a role as we continue on. So we go from all of that, and then we get ourselves over into Act Two. Uh, Act Two starts out with Gil. Now that he's been established, we really see what his day to day life is like, or what I
Hmm.
should say, what his night to night life is like. Between between his wife that he keeps at home, trying to hold down the house and covering for him and we already saw what his kind of drunken temper is like, or just his temper overall. He gets into a
Hmm.
fist fight with Charlie, in Act One, but in Act Two, and that's wild enough. But then it starts to spiral outward, right? Because anybody who's dealing with that type of thing, they usually don't keep the fighting contained to just one person. So now we
Right.
get Gil in inside of a bar setting. How did you feel about just kind of seeing Gil start to act out and it start to affect more of the outside world and whatnot, and even his relationship with Brodsky, because he used to work for the studio too. He's blacklisted now, but
Right.
you still know people.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You're still in the same town. You're gonna bump into somebody from
Yeah,
your old job. Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
never work in
Gil,
this town again, but you still live in this town.
you still live in there. Absolutely. Yeah. No, Gil, Brodsky, he even says in one of these word balloons, he's like, looks like you're a real wrong place, wrong time kind of guy. And that is kind of poor Gil. I mean, I almost can't blame him for being this depressed or this like striking out, lashing out at Charlie. Cause yeah, he gets blacklisted. He just gets stuck in all these terrible situations. Now he's stumbled onto Charlie. He thinks maybe Charlie might be a murderer, or they have this murder case, which by the way the studio has covered up and says it's a suicide because
Right.
again the studio has to protect their interest. So no
Mhm.
matter what happened, they're gonna sweep it under the rug and just say, "Oh, she did it herself. We're not involved."
Yep. No
Um,
cops. You don't have to come over here. Just
nope.
get her, do the whole morgue thing, but there's nothing to investigate.
Nothing to look at. And yeah, and then poor Gil is like, we find out he's an alcoholic, so he's an alcoholic and he's a gambling addict. So those two things, I mean, one
Ooh.
by themselves is bad. You put them together and then yeah, like you said, we find out he's got a wife and kids at home, but he's almost never home because he's usually in this little writing office that he and Charlie share, and he's working all hours of the night. And I mean, yeah, it's just you almost feel bad for the guy, but almost. Uh,
Almost.
he does still make his own decisions to an extent, but but yeah, Gil has been dealt a rough hand, but whereas with other characters like Charlie, we see he tries to make the better of it, or he tries to correct it. Gil is, the hand that he's been dealt. He just kind of just accepts it and just takes it for what it is. And it takes this whole instance with Charlie to kind of shift him in, like kind of see if he can do something. Kind of take some what's the word I'm trying to say? Try to shift him into a second gear, kind of, or get
Hmm.
him, kind of jolt him out of his default setting, I guess.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Because that default setting is, as it
It's not getting him
obviously,
anywhere good. I mean, he
no,
what's he doing? He's drinking his liver out. He's gambling away all of his money. He's not spending time with his family. I mean, we
right.
even find out later on, like, apparently things have been deteriorating so much between him and his wife. His wife has been making passes at Charlie. Whenever Charlie comes by, so it's like, dude, you got to pay some attention to your family. But yeah.
Seriously. No, and I think that was also the interesting dynamic about them because as we find out why they're a tandem, like why does Charlie even need a Gil? It seems like he's more trouble than he is good. Like Charlie
Hmm.
Charlie's in this state of mind. We find out that Charlie was, a soldier in the war and he's gotten a little shell shocked and it's
Yep.
affected his ability to write. So he's kind of in this place where he's got writer's block. So, and then
Yep.
Gil is, he's blacklisted. He can't work in the town anymore, but he still needs
But
to make a living.
he still has the skills too. He's still, he's an experienced writer.
Yep.
So
So
yeah.
they end up needing each other. Like Gil needs Charlie to work and he needs Charlie to kind of give him something to do. He's one of those people where idle hands are the devil's playground. I mean, in that case, idle hands is like the devil's Corvette. He's gonna jump in it, and drive it fast and
Yep.
in the wrong direction. So their
Yep.
dynamic of like, they need each other more than they like each other at this point, as much as they
Yeah.
argue. And even though Charlie's kind of lost the touch, he still wants to argue about script points and how to approach things and stuff like that. Gil's like, get out of my way, like let me just do this so we can turn this in and make our money, because we've already got enough problems with the death on our hands, you trying to figure out who's going on, what's going on. Charlie's paranoid. The last thing that we need to do is start getting behind on scripts and stuff. But this is the
Right.
Hollywood system. And then we start, this is where, like you said, Thursby starts to play a role, and we find out, that he's kind of like that manipulative, grabby, kind of pervy old studio guy. And then we,
Hmm.
we find out more about the director, Franz Schmidt, how, you know, the death of Valeria is affecting him, and having Maya on there is affecting him, and he doesn't like how she reads the lines. So at this point, he's like, you know what, Charlie, you got a good relationship with her. Like, why, or like, why don't you rewrite it and write it better? So he's got to take it back
Right.
to Gil and be like, he doesn't like it. I mean, he liked it before, but he doesn't like how Maya's doing it, so we got to rewrite it. Just all of those things really made it feel like a lived in world. But
Yeah.
Thursby, we find out that it's not just he's grabby. I mean, because that's bad enough to be taking advantages of actors and actresses and stuff like that. But we find out that his bungalow, he's got one like out in the hills where they used to shoot like some of the kind of westerns and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And Flapjack, who I said would play more of a role later, he was the black trumpet player.
Yep.
We find out that he starts giving clues to Charlie as some things that might have been happening, letting Charlie know, like, hey, yeah, remember I was one of those child stars in one of those
It's
series
almost
that,
it's almost like a Little Rascals type thing that he
yeah,
was in. Yeah.
that's what
With
it
with
feels
Valeria,
like.
because Valeria was one too. Was it Valeria or
Or
was it
it was
Maya?
Maya. It was
It was
Maya.
Maya. Okay. It was
Mm-hmm.
Maya. Yeah.
Yep. And he just lets him know like some not so savory things were going down there. So now Charlie's got this whole other thing on his plate. How did you feel about this additional storyline starting to unravel with some of the people that probably you didn't really think were gonna be that important when you first got introduced to them in Act One?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff with Thursby, like I guess I didn't know how far down the rabbit hole would go with him. Obviously, there's that scene where it starts out where it's like explaining him going up into the hills, and he says he's up there for like 2 or 3 weeks before he comes back, and he's starting the studio, and you find out he did like all kinds of crazy degenerate things in the hills, and kind of
Hmm.
leads into his, as he's aging and as I mean, he's still as creepy and pervy, but now he's also got like mental deterioration going on. uh so we find out like and he's also just like stubborn, he's quick to lash out. um so yeah, I mean, I love like how these side stories, I say with quotation marks, side stories,
Hmm.
because they do ultimately end up playing a part in the bigger overall story. With these characters, everything kind of, it's like a gumbo pot. Everything is a different ingredient, but it all adds to the flavor. But yeah, and Flapjack, I was almost bummed that he's not in more of the book. I feel like he and Charlie had like this really cool rapport where they were,
Yeah.
there's that scene where they're talking together, they're sharing a drink, and he felt like the closest thing Charlie might have to, like, besides Dottie and besides Maya. He didn't really have any other like positive relationships with other male characters. Like we were saying, he doesn't like Gil so much as he needs Gil. He doesn't get along with Brodsky. Maybe Earl Rath, the movie star, but he just kind of
Hmm.
just like, he's not really a friend so much as he's just like a way to get into these. Like, that's how I think Earl is how he meets the photographer. I
Yeah,
think
it
the
was.
photographer to the
Yep.
star.
Hmm.
So yeah, I was like, oh, but yeah, Flapjack was an interesting character, and and then we see him later on. We see after this conversation with him, he's coming out of this party, and he sees Maya talking to. I really enjoyed this. This was a nice little Easter egg where she sees Maya talking to Desi Arnaz,
Yeah, yeah.
because he's the leader of the band that her husband. I love those little Easter eggs where it's like
Yep.
Desi Arnaz, or here's Clark Gable,
Clark
who
Gable, yeah,
comes
like
in.
putting the real world people in there and making it
I
feel
love
like,
stuff like
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Hmm.
I love stuff like that. That was just really cool. But then here's where we see Charlie is like, all this relationship has kind of been building between Charlie and Maya, and at this point, she lands a smooch on him, and we find out, over the next few pages, they've taken this. It's no longer just writer and starlet. This is now
Hmm.
like a romantic relationship now,
Yep.
and so things have been elevated.
Absolutely. Which, I think that dynamic was so perfect for the story, not in and of itself, but in the context that Charlie's, recent life has been very, just full of anxiety, paranoia, and just stress. So, he's one of those people, he knows his role and he plays it. And this is
Hmm.
a very odd thing, out of the ordinary to happen to him. So for him to get a sliver of, is it respite? Is that what they call it? Like a little bit of like
A little bit of
sanctuary.
peace. Yeah, sanctuary. That's a good word for it. She's almost like his anchor. Like, she's like something that he can come back to, and he knows, okay, yeah, everything else is crazy right now. The murder, Gil, this movie that I'm rewriting for. But Maya, there is like this, like you said, sanctuary kind of that
Hmm.
she gives him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he treats her like such because their relationship grows. They start spending more time together.
Hmm.
They already had, like you said, they had a good rapport because she comes in as just like the type of gal that can like hang out with the gals or the guys. She can kind of be anybody. She's very comfortable in her own skin, and you very
Yep.
much feel like part of the reason for that is the things that she's seen and that she's seen in her experiences that she's been through and is currently going through. She's like anything less bad than like my home life and all and the stuff from the past. I can
Hmm.
deal with, especially when we find out, for sure what she had dealt with as a child,
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks to Thursby. But
Yeah.
so and then for them to kind of because of their situations perfectly find each other and be compatible like that, and then Charlie, like really both of them, really just being each other's sanctuary. They start getting really comfortable, disappearing
Hmm.
like at beach bungalows for a while, and
Yep.
like Charlie becomes to be starts to be so settled in and a little more relaxed that we even as readers forget everything that he's actually dealing with. We really do feel more like Charlie, this intoxicating fling that he's got going on. And for Maya, how she's escaping, you know, the difficulty of coming up in the studio system for stardom and her home life and all that other stuff. But then things begin to get interrupted as a few other things are starting to come to light. Charlie has a run in with the guy that he thought may or may not have been following him. He ends up having a run in with him in a bathroom. The guy catches up to him and does end up letting him like giving him his business card and is like, "Hey,
Hmm.
I'm looking into this, and I'd really appreciate if you know anything about it that you give me that card." So boom, right, pull yanked right off of cloud 9 back down to the earth, and he's back down into being like, okay, I got my break, I got my little vacation, but things are
Hmm.
not sweet. We are still very much trying to figure out what happened with Valeria Summers, that dead starlet.
Yep.
And then not to mention, he also starts to become suspicious of what is it? What's his? I almost called him Earl Grey. What's the dude's name again? The
Brodsky?
No, not
Was it Brodsky?
Brodsky. Our buddy. Oh, he was just right there. Yeah, Earl Rath. He
Wrath.
really
Oh, okay.
starts to become suspicious of Earl because, you take the fact that those pictures that they found out about getting introduced to that photographer, but now he's
Hmm.
also thinking back like, hey, who else was at that party with me? His memory is starting to become less and less foggy, and he's starting to
Right.
remember walking with certain people and smoking cigarettes with certain people. And so he's
Hmm.
starting to think that maybe Earl, with all of his power and with all of his charm, in Hollywood right now, might have had a thing going on with Valeria and took it too far, and maybe he was the one that killed her. What do
Yeah.
you think about that whole?
That at this point, it seemed like like on the one hand it seemed like a plausible theory, like okay, but at the same time when it comes across in the book, like at least in the collection that I have, like there's still like a good half a book to read. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, it seems plausible, but at the same time it just seems too convenient. Like there's got to be an extra level or two to unravel here. Like maybe he did it, maybe somebody made it appear like he did. I wasn't completely sold on it, but I could see where, it was at least a realistic theory. Again, making this book seem really authentic, making the characters and the situations seem very authentic. I could see where he could have been the
Mm-hmm.
murderer. But like I said, just because of how much reading there was still left to do, I was like, okay, I think there's got to be more to it than that because they're not going to have all these pages left just going through these different side story beats. So, but
Absolutely. And then
yeah.
ultimately where we end, like, after Charlie has to help Maya and go find her husband, who's
Hmm.
in, some like the 40s, equivalent of like a crack house, because
Yep.
he's just drunk, passed out, in there, and they go and they dig him out and find him. Charlie heads back to his studio where him and Gil write, notices
Hmm.
that there's some papers in there that he does not remember them having a writing session before, pulls out
Yep.
the ball of paper and realizes that this dude Gil is turning into the Walter Sojak of from the Big Lebowski of this
Yeah.
story, and he's trying to blackmail. He's trying to use blackmail as a way to find out more information about what's going on, and he's a terrible typist, so he was like crumpling up his
Hmm.
his misspelling and throwing it away. What did you think about that development?
Man, at that moment, Charlie is probably hating the fact that he just like, because ever since the very first act, when Charlie is like passed out in their office and he has to tell he feels like he has to tell Gil everything that happened. At that point, he's probably regretting all of that at this point. when I was reading it, I didn't at first I didn't think it was Gil necessarily trying to find out information, like trying to sleuth the case.
Hmm.
I was thinking like, okay, well this guy's been blacklisted. He's got to rely on Charlie for work. They're obviously not getting a ton of work done at this point. He's
Right.
just trying to make ends meet. So he's taking this opportunity that was given to, like, that fell into his lap, all, what he knows from Charlie. He knows that, okay, Thursby might be involved or the studio might be, so he's using whatever information he got from Charlie to blackmail Thursby to just get like these drops of money,
Hmm.
which, Thursby knows. So we see throughout the story he's got like Brodsky like eyeballing these drops, trying to figure out who the blackmailer is. And
Hmm.
Gil, despite being a gambling alcoholic, he's not entirely stupid. He doesn't give himself away. Brodsky hadn't caught up to him yet. But yeah, at that moment, I was just like, when I saw that with like the bad typing and everything, and he's like, Gil's always been a terrible typist.
Hmm.
I was just like, dude, he probably hates the fact that he told Gil anything at this point. Like, he's like, why did I why I knew better? Why did I tell the alcoholic blabbermouth anything? So yeah, poor Charlie, man, just can't catch a break. Can't catch a
Mm-mm.
break.
Nope, can't catch a break at all. And then, so, that's where Charlie is now at this point. He's got things going with Maya, the
Hmm.
kind of FBI dude who we weren't sure if he was just being paranoid about or if there really was a concern. That guy's officially been introduced. Charlie
Hmm.
knows that he's real and has his contact information.
He
He's
also slips a note into his pocket too, which is like got him kind of
shook.
like his paranoia senses are tingling.
Yep.
So yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
It's very, very crazy. So all those things, Thursby, we're finding out more about him. All of these things are, are like all of the pieces on the chessboard are set up right for us to have just that calamity and that catastrophe, and for Charlie to just go down because the only lead that he's got just seems to be a little more paranoia. Like you said, he's like,
Hmm.
oh, Earl Rath, maybe it
Yeah.
was Earl, and Earl is, one of the people that in the studio system that treats Charlie with the highest esteem. Like they go and
Right.
hang out, by themselves and kick it, like yeah,
Yeah.
like Earl, it seems like Earl likes Charlie just purely for who Charlie is. Not, I mean, like Earl is so high on the ladder. There's nothing that Charlie can do for Earl. Earl is living the good life, so it really seems like that they have a good relationship.
Which also, I mean, but this also kind of plays into that paranoia bit because he's like, well, why is Earl this chummy with me? Like you said, he's big time movie star. I'm just a screenwriter. I don't get a lot of. I mean, really, Gil writes most of the stuff, but he's like, yeah, why is he so chummy with me? Why do we? Is it him trying to play up to me because he knows that I might have some knowledge. I might start remembering stuff. So it
Right.
does kind of play. Yeah. So again, that paranoia theme just kind of creeping into all these different aspects. Yeah.
Yep. And then that sets us perfectly to go over into Act Three, where we take things home. So we kick off in Act Three, and we pretty much hit the ground running on this one. We get a little bit more backstory into I believe her name is Maya, who is oh no, not Maya. I'm sorry, that's Charlie's gal. We get a little bit more of the story into Gil's wife, who I think her name is Melba. Yeah, so we find out a little
Yes.
bit more about Melba, and because of Gil, his drinking, his erratic behavior, his gambling, like we said, he's not there tending to home. Zach mentioned earlier, like
Yep.
the kids are missing him, Melba's missing him, but she's getting to the point where she's not missing him so much anymore. And yeah, she starts to take some passes at Charlie. We find out more about Charlie's past as well, like him feeling the need to arm himself now because things are getting really tense. So he goes back to his
Yeah.
ex-wife's house and some of the stuff that he had from serving in the military, like his military issued pistol. He goes and gets
Hmm.
some of that back because the heat is starting to kick up. Um, like yeah, just how did you like? What was your take on kind of the temperature of where things were and how they started to ramp up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, obviously Charlie was getting really tense. I mean, he knows that Gil is out there acting. I think Gil is really the match that fell into the gas tank that it created a real sense of urgency because he knows that Gil can just he's a drunkard, he can mess up. I mean, he's wrong place, wrong time Gil. All he has to do is do one wrong thing at one wrong time and everything can come crashing down. So Charlie's like, okay, well, this is getting serious. He's also paranoid. He's got this guy that slips the card in his pocket. He's questioning stuff with Earl. He's like, Gil can talk to one wrong guy, and everything. These guys can come after me to shut me up. So yeah, so he feels the need. He has to defend himself. So he goes, like you said, to his ex-wife's. He gets his military issued gun and he goes back to the office and he waits for Gil to show up. And Gil, he comes in and he's acting like everything normal, and then he sees the crumpled up paper and the gun on the desk, and he's like, "Why do you have the gun?" And that's where Charlie just goes after him and starts attacking him verbally as well as physically. And that's where it does kind of start going. You start to dive into a little bit more of Gil's past, how he was a good writer,
Hmm.
and then he fell out of the good grade. That's how he met Charlie, how they became good friends, and once all these there's like these different shenanigans too that they got into, like with the
Yeah.
there's almost like this, it's almost like the Indiana Jones scene where he shows them tied up in chairs and they have to deal with the mob boss because of his gambling problems.
Right.
But then yeah, it goes into how Gil's wife Melba is like, forget about Gil, Charlie's over here, and
Hmm. Yeah. Gil's
we find
passed
out.
out on the couch,
Well,
and
we think he's passed out on the couch when Melba
yeah,
makes him. And we find out that Gil actually knows that Melba and Charlie have been doing things behind his back, and
yeah,
so
he saw it
that's
with his
where,
own eye.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's where he really starts like lashing out, and he's just he has this tantrum all the time. Before then, he didn't really have so much of an anger problem. He was just more, just do the job. He wasn't quite so angry, but after he sees that, he feels, I guess, betrayed to a certain point. Because at one point, he and Charlie, I guess, were truly friends. They were,
Yeah.
they didn't need each other as much. I mean, they did to an extent, but they also liked each other. Now,
Yep.
at the point, most of that liking each other, most of that friendship has gone away.
Yep. Now they're past that now. It's more of a relationship. Yeah, more of a situation of need than it is, like. And
Yep.
yeah, man, just all of those things. And it was interesting because it wasn't Charlie pursuing Melba. It was just Melba, like not getting fed. And she was just like a shark on Charlie. I mean,
Yeah.
she hopped on the guy, and Charlie should have said no, but he didn't, in the
He didn't.
midst of
Yeah.
all of the passion and everybody was drinking together, like it just happens. And Gil sees it, and then so as they're getting into it, they're back at the office, and all of those emotions are coming out, and we're learning more backstory. But ultimately it does come out, like, Charlie gets at him about the blackmail, and he's just like, look, man, it's not just about the money. Like, they killed this lady, and and they're trying to cover it up, like you saw Brodsky, out there, like burning some papers and stuff like that.
Yep.
Like the studio's trying to cover it up, and it's just not right. So now we're like, okay, Gil's got some fire in his belly, and he's got a little moral motivation. Now we find out it's not just the
Yeah.
money, but it's something a little deeper, and they got the foolish idea that they are going to stick it to the studio. They're going to stick it to the man, and they're going to bring,
Hmm.
Val, aka Valeria Summers, her justice. Oh man, it's a setup for for just
Boy. Yeah.
whole terrible
Great idea,
everything.
guys. Great idea. Yep.
Exactly.
He
Uh,
finds out, yeah, because Gil. I mean, this is where I actually kind of like, okay, Gil's doing something right because he's talking about how he's been tailing Thursby, and like you said, Thursby and Brodsky, they're burning evidence, they're burning pictures, and we find out Gil, while he's tailing them, he's able to sneak in and actually recover some of these photographs, some of this evidence that they're trying to dispose of. So it's like, okay, Gil's kind of starting to, he's not quite upright walking, but he's at least crawling his way back to a sense of purpose. Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
we got that, and then we find, as they're gaining more information, and Charlie is starting to take into account some of the things that Maya told him and some of the things that Flapjack told him. Now they're at the point where they're starting to uncover more things about Thursby and the other co-founder of Victory Street Studios, and they're like, okay, it's not, you're not just going to cover up this murder. If you're covering up a murder, there's obviously other stuff that you covered up before, and they had both seen probably small things that Brodsky had taken care of, but now they're going back. They're looking into some of the older actors, some of these child actors. They're looking into that whole side of Thursby, you know, the leader of it. And man, what they're starting to uncover now, they're really starting to see some of the things that could have been happening to the children, reportedly happened to the children and stuff like that. So they
Yep.
got it in their mind that you know, they got themselves a gun, they got themselves a location for the crime, and they are going to head up to the old camp up in the woods where some of that stuff is happening, and try to find more evidence, because if it's going to be anywhere, it's going to be there. Um, Man, this is so crazy. So anyway, tell me a little bit about how you felt about that part of the story, because it's just
Yeah, this is. I mean, this is where I mean, on the one hand, you are like, okay, well, these guys are stupid. They're not detectives. They're screenwriters. They're trying to be hero, and it is an honorable. It is honorable in a sense. So like,
mm-hmm,
okay, we're gonna stick it to the man. We're gonna get the justice for Valeria she deserves. And on the one hand, you're like, yeah, but these guys aren't equipped. They're not prepared to do it. But then you actually, I mean, they do kind of, at least they do their diligence. Like we know from some past scenes, like there's a Halloween party and Charlie dresses up as the Invisible Man. And
yeah,
everybody mistakes him for the
for
actor.
Earl Rath,
Except for,
yeah,
yeah, for Earl Rath. Uh, yeah, except for Dottie, because she knows that Charlie has a broken glass lens. And
right,
so, but we see, he adopts this invisible man, which I actually thought was really cool because in Hollywood, if you're a right Hollywood, it's all about like the glamour, right? So everybody pays attention to the actors, the actresses. Nobody pays attention usually, at least not on a set, to like a writer or somebody in plain clothes, right?
right,
So I actually thought it was kind of a neat little double-edged meaning, double meaning things. Like, okay, well, Charlie's like a nobody, really.
right,
He's on a lower. He's not like a super well established writer. He's written some good scripts. I think they acknowledged that one of them was nominated for an Oscar,
mm-hmm,
but especially since Gil he's been ghostwriting with Gil basically. His scripts have kind of fallen in quality. We know that Victory Studios isn't like a super high up studio. It's kind of like a lower tier one. So
mm-hmm,
we know Charlie is kind of this invisible man of a sort. I mean, he hangs out with stars like Earl Rath or Maya, but he himself is kind of an invisible man in the broader sense of Hollywood. So there's a scene where he wraps himself up in the wrappings and he's going around the studio. He's like, I think he meets with Dorothy, or he like tries to when
mm-hmm.
he's trying to find records files and everything. So he is doing some sleuth work here, digging through files, and gotta give him credit for it. But yeah, on the other hand, you're just like, these guys are gonna get shot.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what it is. Because like, and that's the thing I like about it. They take enough steps to be convincing, and
mhm,
they show enough emotion and enough conviction to be convincing. So you say, "I'm convinced that you want to do like your part. Like Charlie, you're past the victimhood thing. You feel
yep,
very strongly that you didn't do it, and you know that there's some other injustice, and you know that they're covering it up,
yep,
and no one came to you about it. So you're feeling pretty strongly that it wasn't you at this point. Gail's
yeah,
got fire in his belly. You got, but like, if anything, if you don't look at him like, oh, you guys are just stupid, you what you really do is you look at it and you say, tragedy is about to strike, because with all of this, you guys are still not fit to be the one to figure this out. Maybe you'll be the spark to start the fire, to burn
yeah,
the studio down, or maybe you'll just be the spark that gets put out by being peed on,
yeah.
by the
Well,
penis of the studio.
it's funny you say that. So there's this whole scene where Charlie and Dottie are in this room. The lights are all off. They're sneaking around. He's looking for files and for evidence, and he's having or it might be a different room, but he's having like a drink and a smoke. I think they're back at his office actually, because he's taken off his costume, and
Hmm.
they're having a drink, and he's telling Dorothy, because Dorothy's one of the few people that he trusts. So he's like
Yeah.
explaining everything to her, and Dorothy's like, listen, you need to drop this and let this go. You need to, anything that you've done, anything that you've told people that might make them think that you're onto them, you need to just go tell them it's a joke. You need to just like cut this out. And she has like this really cool line. You know, she's like, you're, she's like, you're suddenly gonna turn into Sherlock Holmes or Sam Spade. Like, basically, it's like, what? You're gonna turn into this detective and solve everything?
Right.
She's like, and then she says something that I think kind of is a really good interpretation of most of the cast of this book. She's like,
Mhm.
there are no good guys in real life, and we see throughout most of the cast of this book, there are no truly 100% good guys. Like even the protagonist, even Charlie, has done some shady-ish stuff. Like he
Right.
got with Maya when it was against studio policy. Plus, she's also married, so I mean, even that sense, I mean, he got also with Gil's wife, so he's not a squeaky clean guy.
No.
Gil, of course, we talked about, alcoholic, gambling addict, neglects his family. Even Maya, who's got like this good girl image, has done her share. She's put up with some stuff that she
Yeah.
shouldn't have had to put up with.
Yep. And
Really,
abandon
that's like,
her husband. Like
and
she
abandon
did
her
like,
husband.
yeah, turn her back on him, to go ahead and enter into stardom, into her
Yeah.
dreams. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, Dottie is at this point, she's like, listen, if you keep going down this road, like bad stuff is gonna happen. And I really like this scene because like her face in these scenes, you can tell that she actually does care for Charlie. There's
Yeah.
even a scene, I think it's back in the first act. I think it's like a studio party where like
Hmm.
she was under the impression the two of them would be going to this party as a date. And it
Yeah.
turns out not to be the case, and she's upset. So you do see that there is something she wants there to be with Charlie. But
Hmm.
Charlie is apparently blind. I guess that's why he needs the glasses. So Dottie is just now doing his best to protect him. Of course, Charlie, being Charlie, is not going to listen to the advice. He's going to continue to go through with it, though.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, all of
So,
those things, like it's all of those dynamics just felt it, like I said, it made it feel like it was like real people really going through the situation. Dottie, being a voice of reason, trying to tell Charlie like you're gonna get yourself hurt, like and
hmm
you know, and what I liked about it is in as objective as she could be, because earlier on it did show that she did have some feelings for him, but she's so smart and has been around the block, long enough. She knows not to let herself get in too deep and too invested. So when she
hmm
saw that it wasn't reciprocated, and then she saw the whole Maya thing going on, she was like, okay, yeah, let me just pull my bid back and lower my expectations. So, because at the end of the day, I got a job to do, and really, if I fall apart, this whole thing will fall apart because you really feel like Dottie is like the grease that keeps the gears grinding, in
yeah,
that studio. She's like holding things up.
exactly.
So that aspect, but she's like objectively being like, look, you're gonna get yourself hurt, and in a way, in a very subtle way, and I love the subtlety and the nuance. She is pleading, in not a weak way, but in a like, come on,
hmm
dummy, like. I, you should be looking at me. Like you could be avoiding all of this if you just would have got with me, kept your
Yep.
nose clean, stayed out of trouble. And hell, if you did get in trouble, like you think Brodsky's a fixer. Can't nobody
Yeah,
fix up stuff like me? Like
that's true.
it's just like, but all of this stuff is like being set. Like they just built all of this stuff up so well between the characters. It's just so interesting. But with all of that said, of course, Charlie being Charlie, and that and
hmm
like a man is convinced and he's got it in his mind, so his will be done. Him and Gil get the information that they feel like is enough for them to go ahead and charge up to the camp. They go
hmm
ahead, they don't know the level of security that is actually there, but they get onto the grounds, they hop the fence, they get in there, they look around, and they end up finding a film canister that they believe will be uh, the gosh, I'm forgetting his Thursby on film doing
Yeah.
some of these heinous acts that
Right.
Flapjack and Maya and some of the other ones alluded to.
hmm
But then they hear a noise, and of course, there is security there, as there, or at least who they believe is security there. But there's people there, and then they're trying to hightail it out of there. And as they're leaving, Zach, what do they discover in there as they're leaving?
Whew, they discover that old man senile Thursby, who Gil was hoping to get a confession out of, because he said, like I said, he's senile. He'll just
Hmm.
start rambling about something if you let him. And so they're hoping to get a confession out of this guy, but then they go into the bath. They find themselves in the bathroom, and they find him freshly drowned in a bathtub. The bathtub is full, and he's just dead. He's just laying there, and so he's just like mother effer, like get like wrong place, wrong time. Gil just can't catch a break, and so as they're about to get out of there, this other guy walks in. You know, they start to exchange words, but then Gil just whips out the gun that he takes from Charlie, and he's like, shoot first, ask questions later. So he shoots the guy, or he shoots at the guy rather, I should say. And they hightail it out the house. They're out the house, they're running through the trees, they get back to the car, adrenaline's pumping. Gil's like, oh yeah, we just made him crap his pants. Like we're good guys. They get in the car, they get down the road, and Charlie's talking. He's like, dude, we're in big trouble. Gil's not responding. He looks over and he finds out that Gil's been shot. He's like bleeding from the mouth. He's not in good shape. And so yeah, and then that gets us to, I guess it might be the last issue or the second to last issue,
It's the last one.
but the last one, he wakes up, and Charlie keeps waking up. This is the second time he wakes up in a strange. He's like, "What happened? How did I get here?" It's not a bathtub this time. He finds himself waking up next to Maya in this like out kind of in the boondocks town, Mexican part of town where Maya's husband is from. He's like, well, what happened? He goes out, he finds his car. Gil's dead in the car, and Maya's like, yeah, you called me in the middle of the night. You said you needed somewhere to go. Didn't tell her about Gil or anything. So Charlie gets on the phone, and we find out that I'm trying to find it here. Do. I think it's Brodsky that shows up
Yep,
to get rid of Gil's body, I believe. And this
it
is where I was like,
was.
okay, Brodsky does have a little bit, like he shows up to help him.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, didn't expect that from Brodsky. Good on him.
Mhm.
But I mean, of course, he's rough and gruff about it. He is like,
Yeah,
look,
I
give me a
mean,
hand with the body. I'm here. He's there to serve the studio's interests, and it's like,
yep.
okay, well, if this writer shows up dead at a house that Maya lives at, like, stuff like that, people are gonna ask questions.
Especially a
But yeah,
blacklisted one that wasn't supposed to be working there anymore.
yep, exactly. And so after that, there's like a 6 weeks later tag, and it's like, okay, so we're a month and a half, 2 months later. Charlie has been crashing at Gil's house. Obviously he knows Gil's wife, he knows the kids and everything. So, they've been letting him stay there. And Melba is like, even like, how long are you gonna sleep on the couch? Like, she is not shedding any tears for Gil. Like the first night there or a few nights there, we see that they've actually like he was in the bedroom with her, like the body's not even cold yet, and
Nope.
she's already making moves on it. But then Charlie starts to feel like this guilt over it, and he's just like been sleeping on the couch, so much so that Melba's like, "How much longer are you gonna do this?" So, but yeah, after that, we come to find out, stuff is pretty much just carried on as normal. Uh, Tyler, the James Dean esque star, who's had like his own little side story drama. We found out he crashed a car because he didn't like the way the studio was treating him. They had plastic surgery, his face. They set up an arranged marriage between him and Maya,
Yeah,
and
because he
so
was
we find
gay.
out because he was gay. So that, of course,
Mhm.
this era of history, they're trying to cover it up. And so, we found out like, oh, they're still going along with that. They're playing off the fact that he got her a big ring. They're doing all this stuff, and we see Charlie at this big Hollywood glamour party. We see Dottie there, and they're talking. We see that who's here? Brodsky shows up, and they're kind of he said he he's like, they're exchanging these little jabs at each other, even though I guess there is some kind of a little bit of respect there after what
Yeah.
happened with Gil.
Hmm.
But yeah, mostly though, it's like life has gone on. He's like, um, Brodsky says, justice is a fairy tale. That's why you didn't call the cops when you found the girl's body, and that's why you're gonna learn how to live with this. kind of
Yep.
gives him kind of that tough love, like, hey, listen, man, pick yourself up. This is, that there is no black and white, right and wrong. You just know that you're gonna have to shove this down, dig it deep, and get over it. And so he's talking to, is it? I want to make sure I have the right guy here. It is Brodsky,
Hmm.
I believe.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
talking to
Phil
Brodsky
Phil
at
Phil
the
Brodsky.
party.
So he is talking to him at the party, but then he's like, "Listen, you need to tell me," because at this point he Charlie's got figured out that Brodsky knows more than he's been telling, more than he's been letting on. So at
Yeah.
this party, he's like, "Listen, I will learn to live with this, but you need to let me know like I need to know." And he's like, "Listen, I'm not going to tell you. I'm paid to forget things. I'm paid to like have the studio forget things." Finally, though, he caves in. He's like, "Listen, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to do it here surrounded by all these people." So we go, the two of them are in this dive bar, and he's like, let's say, like, he doesn't tell him outright. He's like, let's just say hypothetically, just still making sure he's covering his own ass. He's like, let's say maybe this happened. Maybe there was this guy who was an FBI agent who came in undercover. We find out that he was originally there to root out communists,
Root out the
get people
communies. Yeah.
exposed and blacklist them. But this guy, like Icarus, flew a little close to the sun. He got used to the power and the lifestyle that comes with being in Hollywood, and he started to abuse that power. And we find out that he was going he was at this party. This is the guy with the glasses, the guy that gave Charlie the card. I believe it's the same guy.
Yeah.
We
Same.
find out
Same.
that
Same dude.
he's got some pervy tendencies. He was exchanging favors with actresses, and you know we find out that he was the one that kills Valeria.
Yep.
This is the guy. It wasn't Earl. It was this other guy.
Yeah. The guy that
And
Charlie thought was after him. The guy that he was
yep,
paranoid and thought he knew that Charlie killed Valeria.
yep. And so at first I was like, well, did he go after her just because he wanted to do stuff with her? But apparently he was trying to push her to expose someone, I guess, as a communist, or expose Thursby, or exposed the studio, but Valeria didn't do it. She wouldn't rat out anybody. So
Right.
as this agent is, you know, forcing or trying to force her, he's like strangling her, and he ends up choking her, and that's how he kills her. And so yeah, that's how we find out. Now, when Charlie finds this out, he finds out the guy's name. I think it was Drake was the last name of the
Yeah. Drake
agent.
was. Yep.
So he goes and tries to find him, but his office has already been cleaned out. There's a different name on the door. They say, "Oh yeah, he's gone back east. He's gone to, I guess, work Broadway, expose communists on Broadway." So he's already in the wind, probably being protected by the FBI, which
Mm-hmm.
again ties back into what Brodsky said, and even what Dottie said is like,
Dottie said. Yeah.
there are no good guys. There is no justice. You're just gonna end up getting a. You're not gonna get a happy ending. You're not gonna get a fairy tale ending here, because even if you know who did it, there's no way that you can, you know, get the guy arrested or get him taken care of. So yeah, and then we find, Charlie, just like, he goes off into the streets, and the last panel we see, he's got a bottle in his hand. He's just drinking his sorrows away.
Yeah, man. I mean, and that's the part that I loved about it the most, like how it ends. Like
Hmm.
again, tragedy. You're not like
Yep.
it resolves, but you don't get the resolution you're looking for. You get all of the
Exactly.
tension, you got all this other stuff, and you get a climax and you get a finale, but
Hmm.
it's a more sobering reality. You don't knock down the like the bad guy still gets his comeuppance. And I apologize. We were talking about Thursby a lot because the two owners of the studios was Thursby and Al Camp. Thursby
Hmm.
knew what was going on with Al Camp, but Al Camp was the pervy one doing all the stuff to the kids. So it was actually Al Camp
Oh,
that
okay.
was
Al Camp.
that was
Okay.
doing that. He was the old senile one. Thursby was the one that was like really sad when Valeria died and like put his face like on the screen. I actually have
Yep.
that's one of my favorite panels that I've read in the last 10 years
Oh,
of
okay.
comics, and that's one of my desktops, like him,
Oh,
putting
wow.
his face on the screen as, Valeria is projected,
Yeah.
up on there. But you know, Thursby still gets to continue to like have the studio go on. That's who
Yep.
Brodsky is protecting. He's protecting Thursby in the studio. Al Camp is the one that got taken out, and that was pretty much Thursby too, sending Brodsky like, "Hey, this old man's gonna take us down. He's old and senile anyway.
Mhm.
People are on his coattails. Like the guys that Brodsky was burning documents with are the guys that they ran into, and that's part of the reason why Brodsky had to take care of Gil's body is because it was Brodsky's men that killed Gil. So
Right. You
like
gotta eliminate the evidence. Yeah.
you gotta eliminate the evidence. And and that's the funny thing too, because he ended up helping out Charlie,
Mhm.
but I think of it like how like Breaking Bad, how like Mike. Have you seen Breaking Bad?
Oh
Like
yeah.
all this
Oh
season?
yeah.
Okay, so kind
I've
of
seen
how
all.
like
Yeah, I finished it fairly recently, actually. Yeah.
okay,
Mike is
awesome.
awesome. By the Mike, actually, yeah, Mike is pretty much
He's like
Brodsky.
Brodsky, right? And
Yeah.
like how Walt, like how he could have killed Walt so many times, but like
Mhm.
Walt was needed. Like if he killed Walt, it would have been more work for him, and then there would have been
Right.
so he kept Walt alive so many times just because, like, hey, Sal wants you, or what was it? Was that Gus wants you alive? And,
Gus. Yeah.
if it was up to me, I'd kill you. But at the same time, then it's more work for me. Charlie was kind of in a
Exactly.
similar scenario where Brodsky was like, you're on thin ice,
Mhm.
but if you like, but I have to help you out because if I just kill you too, it's just more work and then it just looks more suspicious. So I'm gonna help you out. And then apart from business, when they really wanted the answers, he leveled with him and he, like you said, hypothetically
Yeah.
told him what really happened. And then
Yeah.
Charlie, he's just reeling from it all. Gil's gone. He
Mhm.
found Camp dead. He learns that Maya really was abused in that way, and so was Flapjack.
Mhm.
Melba is looking to him to kind of be the replacement for his best friend Gil, because in Melba's
Yep.
mind, Gil was gone a long time ago.
Yep.
It's just
Dottie's
all,
probably still upset that he never picked up and put two and two together.
yep,
I
and
mean,
he's
Charlie's
realizing
life.
that
And all of this is also all on top of the fact that he's also this guy who's returned home from the war or
from the
from the
war.
military. I
Yeah,
mean, they don't touch on it so much. Like they touch on it at a few points in the story, but like anybody that knows anybody that's been in the service or like that's been through like combat time or war, like that already takes a big toll on your mind. We know it took a toll on him because he couldn't write anymore. So, that on top of all this stuff that's been going on, I mean, really, it's like realistically, what other choice is there for Charlie than just take a bottle of gin and just go walking on the streets like a drunkard? And I was thinking at the time, it's like, because the way even the panels look, he looks almost like a younger version of Gil. It's like he's starting to make that transition. He's going to become that old, bitter, depressed, ambitionless writer that Gil was. He's kind of taking steps into that transition. So it's
absolutely,
it,
man.
you kind of become the thing that you hate or that you don't like to be around, at least. So
Yep.
yeah.
And Maya, and like Maya being taken off the table, like that's
Hmm.
like one of the conditional things. He can't mess with Maya
Right.
anymore,
He can't mess with Maya anymore. Yeah.
and the whole arranged marriage with Tyler Graves. You know what I mean? Like it's all
Hmm.
hitting him at once. And yeah, like in
He's lost everything. Yeah, because Maya was like we said earlier, she was the sanctuary, she was the rock, the place that he could feel safe.
yep.
And now he can't even, because now she's going to be under the paparazzi spotlight all the time, and if they caught her with another guy, it would put more scandal on Tyler,
Mm-hmm.
and on the studio. So yeah, everything good has been taken out of his life, and now he's just left with the bad.
He's
And
just
it
left with the
really
bad.
is, it really is a tragedy. Yeah.
I want to read this last page because it was perfect because it circles back to the beginning so well. It says,
Mhm.
"Now Charlie thinks he was wrong. Maybe those planes were up there and they dropped their bombs and burned Hollywood to the ground. And everything since then has just been a delusion. The bad dream of a life lived in hell, and he just wants to scream, but he doesn't."
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it fades out like the
There you
classic
go.
old noirs, the fade out, fade to black.
Yep.
Oh man! All right. Well, there we go. I mean, Zach, like closing thoughts. Just tell me, like, we
Oh.
went through it, so now wrapping it all up, how did you feel after reading the story and going back through it? And you can throw in the addition of us discussing it now too, because I know it's one thing to like read it and you go through it, but to
Hmm.
like hash it out with someone else. Now, how are you really feeling about this story?
Now, I mean, I'm loving it even more now because even as we're talking about it, we're talking about certain characters and story beats and everything. Like I'm putting two and two together on some stuff that I didn't necessarily catch the first time. Maybe it's because I was taking it in bits and pieces one day at a time. I wasn't thinking of the whole story all at one time. But yeah, even now, I mean, I love it even more now. I mean, I'm normally not a very like tragedy story, big tragedy fan. Like I'm a pretty chipper guy. I mean, I like we said earlier, I like this is good, this is evil. I like those kind where there's the clear distinction.
Right.
This though, it's like for me, it's almost like the difference between watching like a Fast and Furious movie or what I call like a mindless entertainment movie and
Mm-hmm.
watching like a Chris Nolan film
Yeah.
or something that actually makes you think and you actually like invest your mind into what's going on in front of you.
Yeah.
And there was so much of that in this. It's like, okay, keeping track of the characters and their plots and their motivations, what are they doing, how are they doing it. It is just really, really, I mean, just a masterpiece of a comic. It makes me really appreciate Brubaker that much more, and it really does read like a movie. Every now and then I'll come across a comic or a graphic novel that I can read, and it's like, okay, I could see this playing out like a movie, and
Yeah.
especially this, like we have acts, like Acts One, Act Two, Act Three.
Yeah.
This really is something that I could see playing across in my mind like a movie. Um, which is I mean really cool, and it really adds to that, you know, that feel like that old time noir, the themes of it and everything. You know, yeah, I loved it though. Like I said, great first book introduction into the noir storytelling of Brubaker and Phillips.
Absolutely, man. I agree with you so much. Just so many layers. The character interactions really, really sold it to me. Um, the pacing and how things would get introduced and then kind of taken off the table, but not just for the sake of that. We go into meaningful scenes and meeting meaningful characters and meaningful character building and backstories and all of those things, and for things to get introduced and then weave them all in together, and then you get to the end and it's not your typical end, but it feels earned. It feels a little more honest. Um, it feels less like a fairy tale, for better. Well, I mean, in this case, for better. Definitely
Yeah,
not for worse. And it feels like if this story was a real story, that felt like the most reasonable and honest conclusion that could have happened to
yeah,
something like this. Like if Charlie either dies or best case scenario, everything is taken away from him and
hmm
he has to learn how to move forward with his life with just his life,
right,
and I guess still his job, but it's really it. It's just a bunch of
yeah.
broken pieces that he's got to figure out how to fix, moving forward and just continue to live. And man, I just loved it. That's why it's my favorite, Brubaker story.
It's it's a great, yeah, like you said, the realism of it all too, because like I mean we don't I guess we don't think about it too much, but yeah, a lot of times in the world, like stuff like this, like you could have a crime, a serious crime, or a cover up that happened, and there is no way to get like a true sense of like, hey, this guy did it, this guy should be locked away, this guy should, and Charlie, we find out he doesn't get that, even though he knows who did it, he's unable to do anything, and so yeah, he's got a really realistic case of luck here, and it's like, yeah, you're right, at the end of the book those are really the only two outcomes: either he dies or he has just his life and that bottle of booze as he's walking down the street using to medicate all the pain that's now been thrown on him. So
Yep.
he should have listened to Dottie, should have just left it alone.
That's the moral of the story. Listen to Dottie and you'll be all
Listen to
right.
Dottie. Yep. There's
Oh
a girl, if
man.
there's a girl with those kind of pointy rim glasses, just listen to her, she's gonna be right.
She's gonna be right. She knows what she's talking about. But yeah, man. Yeah, just an awesome story. Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips. I mean, and to know that they have more than 12, of these things, that you can just
Yeah.
jump in and explore and go through. It's really great. But man, oh, and real quick, I'll say, uh, people don't realize, a lot of people don't know, but before they jumped into the current series that they've been working on, Reckless, which they did
Hmm.
3 graphic novels for Reckless in the span of a year, and they've done
Dang.
5 total graphic novels now within the span of 2 years, while also doing that story, that they did in the Martini edition for Darwin Cook's adaptation of Parker.
Okay.
So they're just workhorses. They just bang stuff out. But
Yeah.
before they started on this, and they started on this like around the time of the pandemic, what they were working on after they finished Criminal and after they did Pulp, they were working on the next Fade Out story. They were going to come back to it and they were going to continue. So
Oh.
they
Oh
actually
wow.
they stopped working on that. Brubaker got a bug,
Uh
saw it
huh.
through, and they just burned through, which will be what will be the 5th graphic novel released in the Reckless series, this October. But
Nice.
he's talking about he's like trying to decide right now, do we jump into the 6th one and bang that one out too, or do I want to let kind of Reckless chill for a little bit and then jump over back into what I was working on before I jumped on that. And I think they're in a good place too. I mean, I know it wasn't the goal. The goal was just to put out the book and do it, but I
Yeah.
mean, like, it already got options. Sebastian Stan had already added Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, and like had the
Oh,
Reckless book
nice.
and like was looking at it, like with only his eyes showing, and talking
Yeah.
about, like, researching my next project. Can't talk too much about it. And Brubaker keeps talking about this
Very
movie
cool.
thing that he's working on that he can't talk about. So he's been, when you can't talk about it, but you can
Yeah.
social media post indirectly about it, with the leading
Yeah.
actor who's probably going to be producing it,
Hmm.
especially
That's
with their
that's cool.
relationship, because Sebastian
Sebastian
Stan already,
Stan too, who plays Winter Soldier,
so he's
which
already played a character that Ed Brubaker has written.
and hopefully, I mean, hopefully this time Brubaker gets the proper credit that is deserved, because of course he had that whole interview where he reveals Marvel kind of gave him the shaft over Winter Soldier. So hopefully with this, it's an original graphic novel. It's not something I think that he has to pay Image or any publisher. He doesn't have to, like, they don't take a cut of the profit
Creator
or the
owned.
credit.
Nope,
So
creator
yeah,
owned.
I hope that does happen, just mainly because, well, I'm sure it's a great story. I haven't read Reckless yet, but I'm sure if it's anything like Fade Out, if there's any degree of quality, I'm sure it's going to be good.
Oh
But on
yes.
top of that, I just like it when creators get their due. Like if they have something, I mean, because that's something he started to do, these little independent books, because he wasn't getting his due or his proper pay from the big two. So he started doing this. I don't know that he expected it to grow as big as it has. I mean, now it's the option where Sebastian Stan wants to pick it up and option it for a movie, or I say, yeah, give the guy his credit, because he was there. He put the groundwork at the beginning when it was small. He didn't have a big studio. Nobody was backing him. It was him and Sean. And
Yep.
so, yeah, I'm all about seeing creators get credit for stuff, after it becomes big and everything. I like to see them succeed. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. Yep, it's great to hear. But on that note,
Yeah.
thanks everybody who tuned in and joined us for the discussion on the Fade Out. Uh, keep coming back. We're still going to jump back over to the Hickman Fantastic Four Volume 2 discussion, so there'll be more of that. And I got a feeling that we're probably going to come back and talk about Pulp after Zach reads it, because I think he's going to
Yeah,
love it
probably.
even more than the
I
Fade
think
Out.
I think that's a good bet. I think that's a pretty good bet. I mean, shoot, dude, I'm looking at the back of this book too, where it doesn't have every book they've done together. It cuts the list off at pulp. But like
Hmm.
I see like all the fatal books, all the criminal books, some
Hmm.
one shots like Bad Weekend or Incognito. I'm just like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
I got a nice little reading list they put together for me.
Oh yeah, man, you are set. And on that note, thanks so much for joining us, y'all, and we'll see you here again next week. Later.
Later. And Fade Out.